So, thank you for coming very much. This is Cookie Hood, my muse. And if you recall from last year, we brought Journalista here as a sort of a pilot project to bring podcasting to the film festival. And it was a lot of fun. We had so much fun. We all got to meet Cookie. Now she's judging and doing all kinds of fun things here. I wanted to start a little bit, tell you a little bit of how we got into this, because I'm not a podcaster. That's not where I come from. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a writer, director, and I've produced many things and done all kinds of. You heard the very exciting rendition of my bio, and so what happened was we were out in this world. We were pushing our project, Journalista, which is the story of Cookie Hood, the amazing story. We had a TV series planned. We were going around Hollywood. Got pretty far. We got in the door in a lot of places, and we thought we were going to sell it. And we just couldn't push it over the line. We didn't have enough power to get that over the line. I'll be honest, it's very difficult in Hollywood to get things made unless you have big, strong attachments. So, all of a sudden, somebody calls me up and says, "Hey, Steve, we're sending a bunch of projects to iHeartRadio to potentially be a podcast, and we'd like to know if you want to just throw Journalista in the pile." And I'm like, sure. To me, it was like a fart in the wind. I never thought about it again. I didn't think it was going to be anything. I never thought it would go anywhere. They gave it to iHeartRadio, and out of all that group of 5 or 6 projects, they chose Journalista. So we're in the room. We're in the Zoom room. We're having a Zoom with them, and I'm pitching it. And I'm doing my thing, doing my song and dance, pitching this. And after about 5 minutes in, I'm looking at them, all the people in the Zoom, and I realize it's already sold. They already want it, so I'm just talking. So I thought, I don't want to kill this deal by talking anymore. So I said, okay, so what do we do now? Where do we go from here? And they said, well, we're going to make you an offer. We're going to send you an offer. We're going to get with the legal team, send you an offer. And to myself, I'm like, they're going to pay us. They're going to pay us to do this. I thought we were just going to do it, and they were going to let us be on the air with them or something. So that's how ignorant I was of the process. So they send us an offer, a nice offer, and we talk amongst ourselves, and we think, this must be their lowball offer. So we asked for like a lot more, and they said we got it. We pretty much said yes. So we thought, okay, so we went and made this. So I'm a filmmaker making an audio film in my mind.
But tell them how we got to be and me.
Oh, well, yeah. That's the craziest part.
That's the crazy part.
And it is part of the storytelling of how to make a podcast, because when we sat down, we got a referral from a friend, mutual friend, and we sat, and she told me.
He tells me, I don't believe anything you're saying. You're full of shit.
I wasn't that mean, but I thought this story is too good to be true. There's too much crazy. Nobody lived this life. That's impossible. I don't believe this. And
so I turned to him. I said, "Oh, well, really? Let's meet here tomorrow at noon, and we'll see what you have to say."
So then I get this. She hands me this big box of receipts. We call it the box because inside that box were photographs of her with movie stars and famous journalists and rock stars and politicians and crazy riding around with soldiers in the middle of the jungle and all this stuff. And then there's all these, this press, and then there's all these
videos, pictures,
telexes from Dan Rather, and all kinds of stuff. So she had the proof. So that kicked us.
I told him, take it home, and he says, okay, give me a few days. He called me up the next morning. He spent the whole night going through the box.
I went through the box, and it was true. So we jacked around with it for a few years, trying to figure out what the best way to tell it was. We made a movie called Hate Crime, which came here and won a couple of awards, and thank you so much to this festival for launching that film. And we're at a premiere, the New Orleans premiere at the New Orleans Film Festival. We had a great night, won the cinematography award. Yay, it was awesome, and we're partying afterwards. And my wife back there, Renee, says, when are you gonna do Cookie Story? That's the one you ought to be doing. And
she told him right there, stop all the other presses, just do that.
So that's what we did. But the real part of this, what we just talked about, was the receipts. What was in that box? So when you are presenting and pitching iHeartRadio or any of these other Pandora, whoever, Apple Music,
Amazon,
all those places. The first question you're going to be asked is, what are your assets? Right? And by assets, they mean, what do you have that will be on the air? What do you have? Interviews? Do you have many subject people to talk to? Do you have press,
witnesses,
audio, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So if you're going to make a podcast, and we're talking in this case a narrative podcast, not just a weekly interview podcast, which are two different things. We'll talk about both in a minute. But we're making a narrative podcast. We're telling a story from beginning to end. We're going to talk about her journey from here to where she is now. And so what are the assets? So luckily for us, we had a lot of people who worked with her still alive. So we had a lot of people interviewed. We're talking about colleagues, journalists, famous journalists, some people who were on-air correspondents for CBS, but also her
enemies too.
Also people who were on other networks and stuff like that, but also her camera operators and her sound operators and people who were there. Her assistant, Shalene, who was doing all the dirty work for her. All the people that were in play in her life. So we were able to interview all these people. And why is that important? Well, her story is crazy. So if you're going to tell a story like that happened in the 80s, you have to create context around all of that.
And put them in order.
And put it in
this guy was just putting everything in order. I didn't.
So it's really like doing a documentary series, but there's no picture. So what we're doing is we're telling the story. So we made a decision very early on that we were going to make it a cinematic experience. So we brought in a really awesome sound editor to come in and design the sound. So when you listen to Cookie telling a story about standing in front of a firing squad and having them shooting over her head, you're hearing the gun. You're hearing the soldiers in the back yelling and running around with their jack boots and all that kind of stuff.
Like Ken Burns kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you're listening to it, but you're getting a cinematic experience. And I think the more assets you can bring, and we're talking about movie scoring and that kind of thing all the way through, the more assets you bring to it, and I think as a filmmaker, you have access and you have understanding of those assets. You come in and you make an experience where somebody listens to this and you pull them into the world. Mm-hmm. So just like as a screenwriter, my main job when I write a screenplay is the first thing I want to do is I want to grab the reader, not the audience, because the audience doesn't exist yet. I'm going to grab that reader by the throat and I'm going to yank them into my story. And I'm going to hold on to them page after page after page and not let them stop reading. Just like if you're watching a film or a television series, you want to grab the audience in, pull them in as quickly as you can, and you want to make sure minute to minute to minute they're not going to leave. Because we're at a time now, whether it's podcasts, movies, television series, all that kind of stuff, documentaries, we're watching them on television now, not at the theater, unfortunately. And we are watching all these things, and we give things a couple of minutes before we decide whether we like them or not. And if you're like me, I'm flipping the channel. If I don't like it, I'm looking for something else, and I'm searching until I land. Is that your experience? Pretty much. You're giving it a few minutes. So your job is to win the page, win the day, win the minute, win the opening, win the next chapter, win the episode. So the more assets you have and the more of experience you give somebody when you're doing that, the more likely they're going to want to listen. So when you walk into Journalista and you listen to that, my wife always gives me a hard time because I always say, "Did you watch Journalista?" She goes, "Listen, did you listen to Journalista?" But for me, I'm a filmmaker. I want to give you an experience that makes your senses go boom, crazy, So assets. So the first question you're going to get asked by iHeartRadio, who we did our deal with, is, what do you have? So the first thing, if you have a podcast that is going to be a narrative where you're telling a story, you need to make sure you have your assets. You need to know what you have because it matters. In our case, we had all these people, we had all this other stuff, all her receipts, but then we went out and had to find stuff, find contextual information, news stories of the day. A good example is there's a point in the podcast where Cookie has been arrested. They think she's a terrorist. They're yelling at her, screaming at her, and they realize, and her friends told her, act like you're an American because they'll protect you. Because she is a purebred Nicaraguan and a purebred American at the same. She can talk like a sailor in New Orleans, and she can talk like a street person in Nicaragua. in Spanish. So she has the whole spectrum of that. And you should watch her go when she goes. Crazy. She's like talking Spanish to somebody. She's like, la, 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 and I'm like, fuck, what's she saying? I don't even know what she's going on. So she's speaking English, right? And we're talking about like 1977 or something like that. And, 1974 was the
firing squad.
Firing squad, yeah. So there was a big news story in America at that time. There was this really famous heiress who was kidnapped by the SLA. Her name was Patricia Hearst. She happened to be a tall, thin American who looked just like Cookie. These people in the room, the people who were yelling at her and scaring her and all that kind of stuff, they thought she was Patricia Hearst. So the reason I'm telling you that, it's crazy. First of all, it's absolutely insane. But we're doing a podcast for an audience where most of the people have never heard of Patricia Hearst. So what do? We build that story around, we talk about who Patricia Hearst was. Why is that important? Because it's really fascinating. It's a piece of history. But it's kind of like where we are right now. It's the same stories we're dealing with in real life right now. Terrorist attacks and craziness.
Well, it's like first, everything Steve says, but the main thing is you got to have a great story.
Yeah.
And based on that great story, we thought we were just going to be entertaining. And as the process went on, Steve looks at me one day and says, this is much more than entertainment. This is educational. This is women's empowerment. We talk about addiction, 1-800. It was everything rolled up into one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, that's it. But all these assets, I'm going back to the assets thing because this is what you have to have. You want to take a story like Cookie has, and you want to build stuff around it. Because it's not just about Cookie, it's how it connects to all the things that matter to you now. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, this is a woman in a man's world. She's in a world, like I asked her one time, were you ever, like, sexually harassed? She goes, what was the answer?
I think I was, but,
she said all the time. She told me, she said all the time.
But at the time, you just, she's that broad that works with us. Yeah, I'm right in there telling the dirty jokes, the whole shebang. Sure.
But that was the normal back then. That wasn't unusual.
Because there weren't women in the industry, not many at all, especially women that would go with the soldiers, embedded in the jungles, and doing everything that they were doing, except they had weapons. We didn't. We only had cameras.
The camera was their weapon, and that's how they would hide behind them. That would be their protection.
We thought.
But this is her story applies to now. And another thing about podcasts, you've got to talk about stuff that is current to people that would affect their lives right now. And her story, I think, hits all those marks in a really interesting way. And so that's kind of the first thing you want to deal with. Do you have the assets to make a podcast, which is essentially a documentary without picture? So that's one thing. Do you have the assets?
Well, the first thing you told me was, how great is this that we can do a show where the star is still alive.
Still alive. That's a big one.
All the witnesses, all the cohorts, all the people, they're all still alive. Except the drug people didn't want to talk to us.
And there's another really interesting thing when you're making documentaries and podcasts, and it's this thing called fair use, where you can use clips from news. We had a lot of news clips from all over the place, borrowed, stolen.
And I had a lot of video.
A lot of video.
Still from back then.
Here's a great story. We were missing.
Yeah.
We were missing a lot of stuff. We were having trouble getting stuff from 60 Minutes. It's not available. They just don't make it available. So we were like moving forward without it. And then Cookie said, I've got this old video tape. It's on 3/4 inch, which they don't use anymore. And
I've been lugging it around for 40 years.
She can't watch it because who has a 3/4 inch
Nobody. It's
deck?
been under every condition, different countries.
It was in the heat in her
I said,
shed.
Steve, why don't you check this out? He goes, the odds that there's going to be anything on there usable, but let's try it.
Well, and also add on to that, the big box that was in was labeled one
Just
thing.
one story.
And then the tape on the inside was labeled with something else. So we don't even know what's on it.
But we know there's maybe one or two things on it.
So I take it to one of those places where you can get the 3/4 inch transferred over to a digital file, and I'm looking at it, and what someone had done, an editor who was in love with Cookie, had done like Cookie's Greatest Hits
Put all my stories together.
in one place. And of course, she never could even see it because she doesn't have a
I didn't even
three-quarters
know
deck.
what was on it.
So what it was the missing assets to every story
He knew all the stories, but here was the proof.
every one we were trying to tell. I mean, you're talking incredible things. And also...
And it was usable.
And it was usable. And it was so pertinent in every way. So every story that I was having trouble, I won't say documenting, because we had we had witnesses, but we literally had the tape. So when young Cookie at age 24 is out in the jungle interviewing the survivors of a massacre, the children of a massacre where all the parents were murdered, faces ripped off their bodies, tortured, and these are the surviving children. We have Cookie's little voice in Spanish, asking them questions. And we were able to get these things that were...
He couldn't believe it.
It makes me cry thinking about it.
He couldn't believe it.
When I was listening to it...
Well, you saw it because it was my first pile of dead bodies.
Yeah, and it was just listening to her little tiny... we know Cookie is a big voice. Young Cookie, without 40 years of wear and tear.
Oh, no, but the voice was just as loud back then.
But not in that...
Oh, yeah.
But not when she was talking to these children.
Well, you can't. When you're interviewing people in a massacre... You have to be a part of it. And I would get in trouble because a producer would come up and say, look, you can't get involved in the story. You can't get emotional.
They don't know Cookie.
And I said, the day I can't be emotional or get involved, then that's the day I'm not going to do the story. Okay, go ahead. And I would get away with it. I would comfort first, then interview, and then share the grief.
Yeah. But finding that bunch of stuff right there, and that's what you're looking. You're looking.
Great.
When you're making a documentary or you're making a podcast, you're looking for gold. You're digging for gold. The research level of it is the most important thing. And I would spend more time researching stuff and finding stories and digging out things. Like, for example, we had this one piece where we were doing. Which one? I'm talking about when I found the Nicaraguan story where they're. I found. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, writer of 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera, famous writer from that area. He was obsessed with Nicaragua, and that was before he was writing books. He was a journalist. I found an article from him talking about the plight of Nicaragua, and I had an actor come in and read Gabriel Garcia reading his own words. So some of the assets we use would be people in their own words, but I'd bring in actors to play them. So again, it's all of the things we use making films. It's actors, it's assets, it's research, it's music, sound effects. All of those things go into making a great podcast.
And I'm going to tell you something I would tell Steve. I had fun doing this. We had fun doing it. Sure, there was hard work. Sure, there was research. Sure, there were sleepless nights. But we had fun doing it.
So much fun.
And that makes all the difference in the world. You're having a good time, and we enjoyed every aspect of it, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't be more.
Recording, interviewing, researching. We loved it all.
And you know what's kind of fun about podcasting, especially narrative podcasting, a little different than interview, but this would be true for them as well, is it's the wild, wild west. Anything goes.
Plus, everyone's got a podcast.
Yeah,
so you got to have something different.
But they don't stop you from doing stuff. Like I can tell you, as a screenwriter, one thing: notes, more notes, notes on notes, notes about the notes. Goes on and on. Every person who gets involved in your movie project or your TV project, they have a set of notes. The director has notes. The actors have notes. More producers have notes. The editor has. You have notes on notes on notes. They're always pushing you to change everything all the time, and you're battling with that, fighting for your story.
But nobody battled us.
Never, not one word.
We never had anyone, not one person, say, "Change this line. Use this word instead of that word."
You shouldn't say this. You shouldn't say that.
Well, because I curse like a sailor. But let me tell you, not one thing was changed. Ever.
Now, can you imagine as filmmakers?
9 episodes, not one thing was changed.
Can you imagine as filmmakers going through the process of making a film, soup to nuts, beginning, writing, because there's a lot of writing in a podcast. It's not just, you have to write this stuff. and never having a person from the big company, the multi-billion-dollar company, iHeartRadio, ever say, no, you can't do that.
It was incredible.
You know, we used a clip from American Dad
Oh, yeah.
I wrote this piece that I had in the podcast that was before we finished, and it was me. This wasn't about Iran-Contra, but that's a big part of the end of the story. I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about Iran-Contra because most people don't know what that is anymore, and it's not really what we're talking about. So I wanted to do like a couple of minutes, just a super quick summary. What is Iran-Contra? You know, what is the Iran-Contra for Dummies version? I wrote it. It came out great. And then someone said, I think it was, yeah, it was Sean. Yeah, Sean. Thank you. Whoever said that. Thank you.
Really?
Oh, Rainey. Thank you.
Your wife, dude.
So Sean is one of the executive producers. He said, Steve, have you seen that clip from American Dad? And I said, no. And he sends me the clip, and it's almost everything I said, everything I wrote, but the funny version.
In American Dad voice.
In American Dad voice. And we just stole that clip, and of course, it's fair use because we're doing something educational. Pretty much with fair use, by the way, you can steal almost anything from anything if you're doing it for educational reasons.
Yep.
And it passes muster with lawyers. Now, I don't know about using, we weren't going to be able to use a piece of music from the Rolling Stones.
Look, it's unattainable.
That's unattainable.
The amounts of money they want for you to use, even a line in a song.
Sound-alikes. We use sound-alikes. We had an 80s show, so we wanted 80s music. So
This guy did a great job. A fake Madonna, a fake.
We made a list of songs we wanted that were 80s songs, like Fear the Reaper and all that kind of stuff. And we went in there and recorded it from scratch, and we got sound-alikes. So if you listen to it, you'll hear something.
You'll think you're hearing.
It's like for when she's getting married and Pablo Escobar is at her wedding, and we had a sound-alike of White Wedding, but we called it Black Wedding. You know, but you can tell that's what we're talking about, but you can't sue us for it.
Yeah.
It was so much fun, and we spent days and days recording music in New Orleans, which has the best musicians in the world.
Taylor Swift came and recorded there.
I went to pick up. Yeah, I went to pick up.
Her there.
I went to pick up my drive, and Taylor Swift was coming out.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing thing.
But tell them that you have to be careful before you put a song or an excerpt from a film. Make sure that you won't get in trouble. Right?
Yeah.
That part.
You have to make sure that you're hitting that fair use doctrine. There's four pillars of fair use. Mm-hmm. I can't remember all of them, but basically you're doing something educational. As long as you're not, like for example, if I was doing an episode about American Dad, and I was using if I was using the Wonder Years and I was just using gigantic clips of the Wonder Years, I'd get popped for that.
Yeah.
But I can take a minute of Dan Lauria, scolding, Fred Savage for a quick clip, and I won't get sued for that.
Right, but cover your bases before you use it or you expend any
True.
money or time on it. We had somebody that reviewed everything.
We got a lawyer who's an expert in
and it's worth it, dude.
fair use, and we would send him what we were doing. He'd say, "You're good, you're good, you're good," and you get a letter. What happens if you get a letter from a lawyer, a fair use lawyer, saying saying that this is approved by him? For the most part, you don't get any grief. It doesn't mean you can't get sued, but we took enormous risks all over the place and never had a problem. I kept thinking.
We did cover our bases.
We did cover our bases, though.
Because we couldn't afford not to. Can you imagine if you record 1, 2, 3 episodes, and then you got to go back and redo them again? Studio time, engineer time. You can't play around with it.
Yeah, if we had a Dixie Chick song in this, they'd come after us like in 1 second.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of what goes into it. On the technical side, I will say that a podcast is just what you think it is. There's obviously, if you're making a narrative podcast, I look at it like I'm making a film. I'm doing my work, I'm doing my homework, I'm recording my actors and my interviewees, and we're editing it like it's a film, and we're putting in scoring and special effects, and everything's going to lift off audio on an audio version of that. That's, to me, I have to say. And I'm gonna say this, I've been a filmmaker for my whole adult life, and this was the most fun of any film that I've made.
But I'm going to say something that he doesn't give himself enough credit for. Even before we got down to the nitty-gritty, he sat down with me, and he got to know me as well as I got to know him. But he knew Cookie better than Cookie knew Cookie sometimes. I would say this about a story. He goes, no, Cookie, that happened to you the year before. He wasn't there, but he got to know me. He got to know the material. And boy, did that make a difference.
It helped.
Instead of being 100 years old, if you put in all the years I thought I did everything, it was in a shorter period of time. But that's what he was good at. He got to know the subject, in and out.
And I think it really helps, though, I think also in her situation, but this would be true in your own stuff when you're doing a narrative-style podcast, is, don't just interview somebody one time. If you have access to somebody, the more they talk, the more they remember. And in this case, we had a lot of people. Many of the people she was the youngest of the entire group. So most of the people we were interviewing were in their 70s, some in their 80s. And they would say, the first thing they would say to me, Steve, I don't remember all the stuff. I just don't know if I remember. But don't worry about that. We'll just talk, we'll keep talking, and then I would just keep prompting and talking to them and making it easy for them to remember, and all of a sudden it would start to spill, stuff that they didn't plan on saying, amazing things that they forgot they knew. So it's about being relatively persistent in the interview process, not interviewing somebody once, think, I got it.
Yeah.
You don't got it. The more you talk, the better.
And also the different subjects that you got access to. For instance, a difficult thing we had was reaching out to my drug cohorts, my friends, the cartel people, because I was married to the Colombian drug cartel for a while. And this guy, with me helping, we opened doors and we got even some of those people to talk a little bit about their part in it. Others were dead. Pablo Escobar, he's no longer around.
He wasn't available.
He wasn't available. But between the two of us, we got some people that you would think would never talk, talking.
Yeah, it's so fun, too. But it's important to, as you're saying, get to know your subject matter, get to know your people that you're interviewing. Interview them more than once. Believe me, the more you talk to them, the more it comes out of them. And and it doesn't really matter how old they are.
You'd make me remember.
I would prompt her like, you forgot, that was the blah, blah, blah. And, be an expert. Make yourself an expert on what you're talking about. I mean, I'm a political scientist. That's I've always been into that and followed that and researched that. That's what my degree is in. But every story is a new story to you, and find out single thing you can find out about it. Like, honestly, she's right. I do know more about her than she does.
She does.
I do. And that's part of it. Like, even now, she forgets things that we said in the podcast. When you live Cookie's life, your memory's not going to be great.
High a lot,
I wasn't going to say
so.
that, but I was only implying.
I have no problem with you saying it.
She's been sober a long time.
I was high a lot, and
But yes. Yeah.
Studio sessions.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. The way I would prepare was I would think about, I probably interviewed Cookie.
But we would talk before we go into the studio for years.
For years, but when we were actually going in to record, we went to a good studio. And I also want to say, if you're doing a podcast, make sure your audio is superb.
Yeah, don't try to save money, with bad equipment, bad studios. It's not worth it.
We did record stuff that we later re-recorded because it was.
And then that's expensive and time-consuming.
So from the very beginning, make sure your audio equipment is fantastic. Make sure you know what you're doing. Run tests.
You got a good engineer.
Do all that kind of stuff. But in preparation for any interview, of course, I knew the topics of her life or the topics of the people I knew what I was going to get. I knew what I wanted, and I knew what they already knew.
And he would tell me in advance, look, tomorrow we're going in. This is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. And then you just go you go down every rabbit hole and follow. Prepare, yes. I usually have like 10 or 15 things I knew I wanted to get, and then I would see where that led. Dan.
Yeah. you know, you started this with how hard it is to get something done in Hollywood. It's a film, or, I mean, it just seems to me that what you've done with this podcast, it's such a great character for some young actors to want to attack. And I don't know, the more I'm hearing, your podcast is the greatest pitch in the world.
It is.
Jessica Chastain, and say, here's a 12-hour mini-series I wrote on Cookie's life.
That's exactly
That's
how we're.
what we're doing.
Yeah, we are.
We are.
We've got a big agent. We've got a big management company.
And we've got some big stars that want to be Cookie.
I've got a script. Yeah, all that stuff.
You know, in a series, the first question, you might write a great pilot, but the first question they ask you, where are you going to be at the end?
We have a 38-page pitch deck. We have everything. We have.
And damn, we got some great ladies that want to play Cookie.
Yeah.
We can't tell you who, but we do.
How Hollywood is, that I fought for years. They've given me, a woman in film has given me an award twice because I've always fought for a woman's production company to do movies about real women, not Wonder Woman, which is
right.
Running around in a cheerleader outfit,
Yeah.
boobs hanging out, and at the end a man
Right.
saves the world. But real women like
Yeah.
Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, but Cookie fits right.
She does. She's a hero in this weird, crazy way, a way we haven't seen before.
Oh, believe me, there's 5 of them fighting for us right now.
I was I'll say one thing about your statement is one of the things that we've been telling people is I don't want to talk to anyone who hasn't listened to the podcast. And the reason for that is if they haven't listened to the podcast, then they don't know what we're doing here. And if they have listened to the podcast, this is the main thing, then they heard her. They heard this story, and if you've heard her, you know this is a role of a lifetime for somebody. And
Because people will roll up on us. Oh, okay, let's do an interview. And then we have to spend an hour telling them what the podcast was because they never listened to it. So Steve and I made a ground rule. We're not talking to people unless they've heard it.
And I will say this is really important to know, this is for everyone. Making films and television in Hollywood, it's hard. We've said that over and over. Everyone you've listened to speaking in these things are talking about that. Historically, the best way to sell anything in Hollywood is to have a great piece of intellectual property. In most cases, in the past, it's been a book. It's been a movie. It's been an article, a short story, a news story. But now podcasts are becoming one of the major sources of story material in the world. Right now, they are sought after. They're right and left. They're being picked up and all that kind of stuff. So for those of you who are filmmakers and you're sneaking a way in, sometimes there's a lot of ways in. And I think having great intellectual property, something that sells you as a storyteller.
Yeah, podcast is a new way in.
It's a new way in. Kevin.
So would you suggest just beginning to investing in the equipment yourself and making this, designing and making it? Or would you suggest going and pitching it to someone? I think you pitched it to.
It's both. It's both.
Start exactly.
Yeah,
you could do either way.
It is a great pitch, and I'll tell you, if you have a great story, a podcast is a great way that is very cheap. Like, you don't need iHeartRadio to make a podcast. I mean, I could make a podcast as good as what we just did without anyone's help from iHeartRadio or Spotify, because it's not expensive. It's not expensive to do that. I could do that. You could do that. Anyone here who's made a movie can make a podcast. Yeah. Well, then you take it to those places. All of those places will pick up any podcast and run it. But if it's amazing, then they'll buy it. There'll be a minimum guarantee type. We had a minimum guarantee. We had a locked-in price. That's how much money they gave us. And now we sold that. We got paid. We are now out in the world with this podcast. It makes money off advertising and all that.
Kevin, when ours was submitted, it was submitted along with 5 other shows/ideas. They didn't even look at the rest of them. It was like, this is the one we want.
That's true.
And it was our show. There was no question about it. Yeah.
The difference between what you made and a lot of people is, there are some great stories out there. There are a few stories that would rival the life you had. But when you combine that with someone with such experience teaching great college teaching screenwriting.
Absolutely.
Having such experience, and him able to tell your story in a way that hit the right high points, did it at the right periods of time. I think people could go a long way in remembering that they are telling.
And his voice was just so calming and even, and it made the nut sound, normal. Yeah.
But I think
He really did.
I think it's really important. There's a lot of ways to tell stories, and what the podcast opportunity is another way to tell a story. So those of you, I think about this all the time. I have people coming to me and they talk to me about their story. One of the things I've done for a long time is I have written a lot of things for people who have these great true life stories that they want to tell. Well, let me tell you something. There's a lot of ways to tell a story. And when I hear one now, I'm no longer thinking, oh, this would be a great movie. This would be a great series. This would be great. I think this could be a podcast. This could be a series. This could be a movie. This could be a book. And then I start thinking, what is the best way to tell this story? But I will tell you, people right here, everyone right here, making a podcast is not raising $3.9 million for a low-budget indie film. It's not raising $70 million for a big action movie. This is not raising $300,000 to make your low-budget indie. This is, you can do this in your
garage.
You can do it in your garage. Yeah.
With your roots in Nicaragua as well, is localization on the radar for you?
What is it?
Localization, like recording different languages and all that, or is that just?
Oh, the thing with other countries.
No, we haven't done it where there's different languages, but that you could do that. There's no question you could absolutely do that. Yes.
Can you talk about how you evolved your podcast when you're starting to turn it into a visual?
Sure. Well, it
was always visual.
For me, it was always going to be a TV series or a film or something like that. So in my brain, I'm thinking of it in a visual way. That's why when we made the podcast, if you listen to it, you'll realize it's very cinematic.
You could see.
You can see it when you're listening to it.
Yeah.
But that said, it's still a story. So when I'm thinking about how we're going to make the series, it's the same job I have as a screenwriter. It's the same job that you would have doing that. I'm thinking about the assets I have. I'm thinking about the best pieces of this story, the things that are going to make people care about something.
We had too much material, right?
Too much. The bottom line is when you go to a movie theater or you go to a TV series or you listen to a podcast, what do you want? You want to be entertained, clearly. You want to feel something. That's what you're going for. So when you're writing, those of you who are screenwriters, like my friend Kevin over there, you're looking for these moments in your story you're telling. You're hanging your story on a handful of great moments. And everything is about setting up those great moments and making them fantastic to watch, to listen to feel. Mm-hmm. So this story, what was great about it from the very beginning is it had those things baked in. It had those great moments sitting there waiting to be mined. And then for my job as a writer and filmmaker or a podcaster, because I still have trouble saying that I am that, is to make those moments the best versions of themselves. And if you're a screenwriter, you're hanging your story on a handful of big, serious moments. Set pieces, we call them, or plot points.
And we had so many. Steve's like, we can't put it all in. And this was just one small part of my life.
Yeah,
this isn't even the whole life.
The podcast we have is about 1/3 of the material.
Maybe. And Steve's problem was trying to whittle it down, and we got the best of the best.
Yeah, I think so. There's things that I wish we would have put in there, but we would have needed 3 more episodes.
This just wasn't enough. 9.
9 episodes.
9.
We were...
No, 40 minutes, 40.
They get longer toward the end when the story is really getting to the big... Yeah.
She's got a question.
That's what we're saying.
Well, that's what we're in talks with. A limited series and a doc series. Can I talk about Fernando?
Can I just say one thing?
Okay.
I think it's really important too for people who are doing podcasts to have the correct name. And I think yours is really catchy.
He came up with the name because I was a model first. So Fashionista, he combined that with journalism. That's all him.
That's
He
not even
came
a
up
real,
with that title.
journalista isn't even a real word in Spanish.
And we knew it was the right one. Now, we are in talks, we won't give out names, for a TV series, but we're also a little more secure in a doc series with Academy Award nominated director Fernando Muriel
Marius, yeah.
from City of God. Do you guys remember that? He wants to do the doc series. So we're
Yeah.
penciled in for next year. And the TV series we can't talk about, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Earlier, you guys mentioned that Cookie can speak really fast in Spanish.
Oh, yeah. What dialect do you want it to be in?
Que yo te puedo hablar en cualquier idioma, en cualquier acento que tú quieras.
Go Puerto Rican.
No,
It's too hard?
no, I right there, I just threw Nicaraguan, Cuban at him.
Because when she was young, one of her superpowers was
To get the stories, I could do the different accents. If I needed to get to the Cubans.
she'd be
and
a
I
Cuban.
Wouldn't be allowed, I was a Cuban. If I needed to be, from El Salvador to the death squads, I was a Salvadoran death squad chick. I could do any accent, play any role I had to. And I would always react like the movies. We got shot down in a helicopter once, Russian helicopter, it's coming down, I know it's gonna explode, we're all gonna die. I just acted like the movies, got to the door, jumped out before it hit the ground. Firing squad, same thing. I'm in front of a firing squad. In the movies, they say you gotta talk to them, get personal, they can't shoot you, so that's what I did for an hour. Just talk to the 6 guys with the rifles.
It's hard to believe she was talking like that.
Right?
Very hard to believe.
And I talked myself out of it. And
But
I'm from New Orleans, that's why.
Yeah.
People from New Orleans, we feel like we can do anything, and usually we can.
There's a term for the type of person Cookie is in New Orleans called a yat. And right?
Yeah, but I'm not.
She hates that. I knew she'd hate that.
Because I'm not a yat.
But she sounds like this New Orleans broad.
Yeah.
And then she goes to Nicaragua, and she sounds like,
Well, and I could speak different dialects, the peasants in the countryside, and they would be so shocked because this, white girl jumps out in a wife beater T-shirt, with Walkman headphones, handing out cigarettes and candy, and they didn't know what to make of me, and they would let me through, and I got through anything.
That's right.
And
And we still don't know what to make of her.
Yeah.
But I want to sort of close. We're running out of time here, and I want to take any questions we can take. But I just want to make sure that you understand one thing: that when you're a storyteller, there's a lot of ways to tell stories. A lot of ways. This is one way, but they're not different. You're still telling a story that has important things in it, big moments, emotional changes. You're watching a person, in this case, start one place and they're ending up in a different place. On an emotional level, a physical level, they went through hell to get there. They faced obstacles. They fought.
And in all different directions.
They fought for what
And
they
this
were
guy
aspiring
brings it
to.
all together.
So every story has these same elements, but podcasting is a new way that you can tell your story that you don't need $5 million to do. Any questions, Kevin?
How did you come to 9? Is that just arbitrary? Like you felt like that was enough and not too much, or did somebody tell you?
Why 9? Well, we had 8, but we realized that we had to do 9. So, but I thought it was arbitrary.
iHeart wanted more.
No.
iHeart wanted more. Give us more.
The main thing is I didn't want to water it down by spreading it out. I wanted every episode to be ridiculously magnificent, and yeah. So
Well, every episode you think, okay, the next episode, it can't be better, it can't be crazier, and it is. And that's what gets you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Kevin. At the end of every episode is a little bit of a cliffhanger that makes you have to go to the next one. You had a question, yeah?
You were talking about how these 9 episodes are really only a third of your life. Would you consider doing maybe a season 2 or a season 3?
Well, we wanted to, but Steve thought it was best that we were getting so much interest from Hollywood let's see what's going on there. We could always come back to a podcast.
Yeah.
If we had to. Or for instance, we're keeping the book rights. We're not gonna sell that. We're gonna do that when, things have gone.
Well, we could have done that. We could have told the
have.
story in more episodes. We could have done more, but I think there's something about when you have a lot of material to tell the story. Well,
Just enough.
Kevin will tell you, screenwriting is the art of telling a story in the fewest words possible.
Just enough, yeah.
And if you do it the right way, you're always leaving the audience wanting more. And not wanting more because they're disappointed, wanting more because they loved it. So could we have? Yes, we could have. But I feel like putting this in the episode, 8 was the plan, but we realized in episode 7 that we had
too much.
we had more
We
episodes.
couldn't close it out
I couldn't
properly.
finish it, So that's why, and iHeart didn't give a crap what we did. So
Literally, hands off.
yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
How concerned do you have to be about litigation with characters that are based or inspired by real people that are still alive?
Well, it's something you always think about. But we're also talking, in this case, it's a news story. So everything that's we talk about in this is already public record, except her part. And
The drama that you're going to be.
well, that's a good question. I think it'll probably be somewhat fictionalized, and I think this TV series, yeah, it'll be a story.
Hollywood.
It'll be a story based on this. No, it's a really good question because whenever you're doing a true life story, don't kid yourself. They're always fictionalized to some degree because there are some things you can't do, and changing names protects you, and it also protects the guilty.
We weren't so concerned with litigation, but when you're dealing with drug dealers.
Yeah, there's murder.
We were more concerned with.
Getting
Wait, are
murdered.
they coming after me? Because I'm friends with Rick Ross out in L.A., and so.
But one of the biggest guys involved in the drug side of this story was a close friend of hers from childhood, but he was one of the main guys selling crack
Brought the
cocaine to
crack.
South Central for the
So,
CIA.
He gave me his blessing.
He called her up the other day. He said, "I'm so happy you're so successful with this." But
Yeah.
so it's a really good question. You do have to fictionalize to a certain degree, but that also gives you a little more freedom to do some things that you couldn't do with just. Sometimes the facts are great, but they're not as juicy as a story wants to be, and you want to do what you got to do.
And he got plenty of juice.
Yeah. Any other?
Plenty of juice.
Yes.
Kind of following her question, how did CBS and NBC and all these companies feel about this? Did you
Well, we have fans from all of those places, but
All
we
of
never got a bad word from anybody on
And
that.
nobody said, stop talking. I thought people were gonna say, again, on the drug side, we need you to stop talking. We don't want you to put that out there.
But remember also, we're portraying journalists as heroes. And I think, one thing we're doing is we're saying journalism is a historic thing. We need more of it. And in the times we're in now, we need journalism more than ever. And having journalists be independent and taking risks and going for the stories and finding
doing it
those.
for the right reasons.
Doing it for the right reasons, not propaganda,
like
just
now.
real journalism, not pundits talking.
Yeah.
Real journalists finding what's happening and explaining it to us. That's what happened in this story. And I think the more we get of that, the better.
And Steve, I think that you were able, both of us, to make journalism
Fun.
respectable.
And fun.
Again, even though it was 30, 40 years ago, we need that now. We need it now more than ever, and I just don't see it anymore, so.
Any other questions about anything? Yes.
Are you still married into the?
No,
No.
my son's father, he's since passed away. But
If you see the podcast, you'll if you listen to I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Preeti. I
you
said see again. But
if you listen, you'll see.
If you listen to the podcast, that marriage ended with.
All the ex-husbands are still friends now.
Hold on.
Yeah.
That marriage ended with her running away with $1 million packed in a suitcase. So
Put it under my bed,
so-
under my mattress, going back home.
so the divorce
Yeah.
settlement was $1 million in cash in an old suitcase.
Yeah, and other things.
And endless
other things.
and endless cocaine for the rest of your life. But that's a whole nother story. Any other questions? Anything at all?
We're done, a minute, just
Oh, we're done?
a minute.
All right, thank you very much.
Did you have enough cars? You did? Okay.